They say Hong Kong never wastes land. Even the dead are displaced when the living demand space. Decades ago, an old hillside cemetery was demolished, its graves dug up, its headstones discarded. The ground was flattened, paved, and dressed in bright colors. Today, children play there in daylight, joggers cut across the paths, and families spread blankets for picnics. They call it Golden Willow Park. But at night, the park changes, the air thickens, the lights flicker, and if you wander too close to the willow trees, you will hear a sound the living should never hear, earth shifting. Breath sighing beneath the soil. Some claim they've seen shapes rising among the flower beds, outlines of people with no faces. Others swear the carved stone benches whisper names not listed on any grave. One thing is certain, the dead were never moved far enough. Evelyn was not the sort of person to chase ghost stories. She was a schoolteacher, pragmatic, rational, too tired most nights to entertain the shadows in her apartment. But she had recently moved into a new flat across from Golden Willow Park. The gleaming green space touted in brochures as a renewal of life in the heart of the city. By day, the park seemed harmless. Joggers circled the track, children squealed on swings, and old men played chess under the new willow trees. Evelyn herself sometimes cut across the lawns after work, enjoying the shortcut to the bus stop. The air smelled of fresh grass, the kind sprayed with fertilizer every weekend by maintenance crews. It should have been peaceful, but her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lau, warned her otherwise. That place is not a park, the woman said, voice low and urgent. It is a cemetery. They only changed its clothes. The bones are still there, waiting. Don't stay after dark. Evelyn had laughed politely, assuming it was just superstition. Still, she noticed strange details. The willow trees seemed too old, their roots sprawling wide as though they had been growing long before the park's renovation. Some nights, even with her windows closed, she thought she heard faint chanting drifting from the direction of the playground, rhythms too measured to be random noise. One evening, exhausted after grading papers late, Evelyn decided to cut through the park at dusk. The sun had already dipped behind the towers, leaving the grounds dim. A thin mist pooled near the flower beds. Joggers had vanished, the swings hung still, and the paths stretched empty ahead of her. Her footsteps echoed oddly, muffled by the grass as though she were walking on something soft, too soft. She paused, unsettled. That was when she saw the first oddity. One of the stone benches was etched with faint characters, half buried beneath moss. Names, not in English, not in any official record. Old, weather-worn names, carved deep enough to survive a lifetime. Names that belonged on graves, not in a park. Evelyn told herself it was nothing. Old carvings, maybe a leftover stone that city workers hadn't removed properly. Yet the longer she stared at the moss-streaked bench, the harder it was to convince herself it was random. The names were arranged in rows, almost like a ledger, and though some letters had worn away, one detail was sharp and unmistakable, the date at the end of each line. Years, decades old. She turned away, hurrying down the path. The air felt thicker now, as though the mist rising from the grass had weight. Every breath scraped cold against her throat. Halfway across the park, she heard it, a low thud, rhythmic, steady. At first, she thought it was her heartbeat echoing in her ears. But when she stopped walking, the sound continued. Thud, 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 as though someone, or something, was striking the ground beneath her feet from below. Her skin prickled. She stepped faster, shoes tapping sharply on the path. Then came another sound, a sigh. Not the whisper of leaves or the hush of wind, but the distinct exhale of lungs pushing out air. It rose from the soil around her, long and tired, then faded. Evelyn froze. She had taught children for years, calmed their nightmares with rational explanations. But she could not explain this. The air was still, no breeze to stir the willows. Yet the branches above her shifted as though brushed by unseen hands. Their shadows stretched along the ground, long and finger-like, curling toward her. Something caught her eye by the flower bed. A patch of soil had cracked open, revealing a white curve just beneath the surface. She stepped closer, pulse racing. At first, she thought it was a stone. Then she realized it was not stone at all, but bone, smooth, pale, unmistakable. Her breath hitched. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over the path. When she looked again, the soil was undisturbed, the bone gone, as if swallowed back into the earth. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "I'm tired," she whispered aloud. "I'm seeing things." But the park answered her. A child's giggle bubbled up from the mist behind her. High-pitched and fleeting, she spun around, but the playground was empty. Its swings hanging lifeless. The laughter came again, closer this time, brushing her ear like a secret. Evelyn clamped her hands over her mouth to keep from crying out. The ground beneath her shoes trembled faintly, not enough to unbalance her, but enough that she felt movement, a shifting beneath the soil. As though something restless turned in its grave, the rhythmic thudding returned, louder now. Thud, 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 each beat rising from below. Each one a demand. Panic surged. Evelyn bolted down the path, eyes fixed on the exit gate. But halfway there, she passed another stone bench. Her gaze flicked toward it against her will. This one too bore etchings. And though most of the carvings were faded, one name gleamed fresh, as though newly inscribed. Her own. Evelyn staggered to a halt, chest heaving. She reached out with a trembling hand, tracing the letters. The grooves were cold, damp, real. Her name stretched across the stone, followed by a blank space where the date should be, waiting to be filled. The mist thickened, rising around her ankles like smoke. The willows swayed though the air was still. All at once, the park seemed to lean closer. Listening, Evelyn stumbled back, choking on fear. The sighing returned, longer now, deeper. The earth itself exhaled beneath her. Evelyn's legs trembled as she staggered away from the bench. Her own name carved into stone, impossible, absurd, yet she had felt the grooves beneath her fingertips. The blank space after it gaped like an open grave. Patient, waiting, she pressed a hand against her chest, forcing herself to breathe, to focus on the gate ahead. If she could just reach the exit, the streetlights of the city would break this spell. She walked quickly, then faster, nearly running, but the park did not let her go so easily. The mist thickened, coiling upward from the ground until it curled around her knees. Then her waist. The familiar layout of the park, the path, the flower beds, the playground, blurred into a ghostly haze. Shapes moved inside it. She told herself they were shadows of trees, tricks of light, but then she heard them. Voices. Not whispers this time, but chanting, low, resonant, rhythmic. The words were old, incomprehensible, but their cadence struck her bones with familiarity. Funeral prayers. Evelyn had attended enough traditional ceremonies to recognize the intonation. It rolled through the mist, layered with countless voices, men, women, children, all speaking as one. Her breath quickened. She stumbled forward, the path beneath her feet suddenly uneven. The asphalt cracked open in lines, widening, forming gaps that revealed soil underneath. She leapt over them, heart pounding. The ground trembled again, stronger now, as though something beneath was pushing upward. The chanting grew louder. Shadows rose inside the mist, tall, thin silhouettes like gravestones shifting into place. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision. But when she opened her eyes, the shadows had taken shape. Figures, dozens of them. They stood between the trees, draped in funeral shrouds, their faces hidden by white cloth, their heads turned toward her in unison, the fabric veiling their features. She couldn't see their eyes, but she felt their gaze, cold, heavy, unblinking. Evelyn's throat closed. She backed away, only to collide with something solid. She turned. Another stone bench loomed directly behind her, though she hadn't noticed it before. Fresh names gleamed on its surface, wet as if carved moments ago. She leaned closer despite herself. The first was her neighbor, Mrs. Lau. The second, her landlord. The third, her own name again, repeated, etched deeper. The space for the date was no longer blank. The numbers were scratched in, faint but legible. Tonight's date. Her chest seized. She staggered back, eyes wide. No, she whispered. No, this isn't real. The chanting stopped. For a heartbeat, silence smothered the park. Then the ground split open beside her with a violent crack. Soil erupted, spraying across the path. A skeletal hand, pale and brittle, thrust upward from the dirt. Then another, and another. Evelyn screamed, stumbling back as more hands clawed their way out of the earth. Some were bone, others covered in scraps of rotting flesh. They reached blindly, clawing the air, the ground, reaching for her legs. The mist swirled, the figures in shrouds closing in. Their cloths fluttered as if in a breeze that did not exist. The sighing returned, louder now, so loud it seemed the entire park breathed in unison. Each exhale rattled through the soil, through the bones, through Evelyn's chest. She turned and ran, darting down a side path. The benches loomed on either side, each one carved with names. Some were strangers, others disturbingly familiar, students she had taught, colleagues from her school, her own family. She squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to look again. Her lungs burned, her feet pounding the uneven ground. Behind her, the chanting rose once more, faster, urgent, like a tide chasing her down. The skeletal hands tore through the soil at her heels. She didn't dare look back. At last, the main gate appeared through the mist. Relief flooded her. She sprinted forward, the cold air stabbing her throat. But as she reached the gate, her heart collapsed. It was closed. The iron bars towered above her, immovable, the lock gleaming wet with condensation. She rattled it, kicked it, slammed her fists against it. Nothing. The chanting drew closer, the figures in shrouds advancing, hands stretching through the mist. And then, softly, a child's voice spoke just behind her ear. "You shouldn't be here, teacher." Evelyn froze. She turned slowly. A small boy stood a few feet away, no taller than her waist. His skin was gray, his eyes sunken, his school uniform scorched at the edges. In his hand, he held a wilted flower, its petals black with rot. He tilted his head, his voice calm, almost kind. "We never left, and neither will you." Evelyn's back pressed against the locked gate. The boy stood in the mist, small and still, his eyes hollow as the sockets of a skull. He held the flower delicately, as though it were a gift. She wanted to scream, to deny what she was seeing, but her voice caught in her throat. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. The boy tilted his head further, the movement jerky, unnatural. "Nothing new," he said softly, "only what was promised." He dropped the flower. It hit the ground with a sound heavier than it should have, like dirt thudding onto a coffin. Behind him, the figures in white shrouds swayed together, a congregation bound in silence. The mist clung to them like smoke, and Evelyn realized they weren't just phantoms, they were mourners, forever caught in the moment of burial. Her mind raced back to Mrs. Lau's warning. It is not a park. It is a cemetery. The bones are still there, waiting. She forced herself to speak, her voice shaking. "This land, this used to be your cemetery, didn't it?" The boy nodded once. "They built over us. They planted flowers where our stones stood. They made paths where our bones slept. And they said the dead could be moved." His eyes darkened, the hollows widening, but no one moved us. Evelyn's breath hitched. Images flickered in her mind, headstones torn down, graves dug shallow, coffins left behind, city officials signing papers, developers celebrating a new park, families reassured with empty promises. But the earth had not forgotten. The names carved on the benches were not decorations. They were epitaphs. The park itself was a cemetery disguised as leisure. "Why me?" she asked desperately. "Why show me?" The boy took a step closer. The mist thickened around him, curling like smoke from incense. "Because you looked," he said, "because you touched the stone. You carry our names now." She shook her head violently. "No, I didn't mean to." The shrouded figures stirred, the sound of fabric shifting like dry leaves. Their voices rose again, chanting in unison, the funeral prayers returning in relentless waves. The ground trembled beneath her feet. Cracks opened wider, revealing glimpses of bone and coffin wood buried shallow. The very earth seemed to breathe. inhaling and exhaling through the wounds in its surface. Evelyn fell to her knees. Clutching her ears, the chanting burrowed into her skull. Between the voices, she heard fragments of words in Cantonese. Broken, please. Remember us. Do not erase us. We are still here. The boy crouched before her. His small hands folded neatly in his lap, as if sitting for a lesson in class. Teacher, he said softly, we only ask for memory. But when no one remembers, we must take new ones. His hand reached out, fingertips hovering near her chest. Evelyn recoiled, but the cold pressed against her anyway. A vision burst across her mind, an old black and white photograph of the cemetery before it was demolished. Rows of headstones lined the hill, willows bowing over them. She saw mourners kneeling, incense curling into the sky. Then the image dissolved into bulldozers, workers prying stone from soil, coffins dragged and broken, bones spilling into the dirt. She gasped, her stomach twisting. The photograph burned away, leaving her in darkness. Only the swing of the willow branches remained, though no wind moved them. When the vision faded, she was back in the park. The boy still knelt before her, expression unchanged. Behind him, the figures in shrouds had crept closer. Their faceless hoods loomed over her. Silent, patient, Evelyn's heart pounded. She understood now. The park was no accident of history. It was deliberate erasure, and the dead refused to be erased. They had carved their names back into stone, whispered them into the soil, etched them into the living who dared to walk here after dark. And now, her name was among them. The shrouded figures closed in, their faceless hoods swaying, their feet gliding soundlessly over the mist-soaked ground. The chanting grew louder, echoing from all directions, rattling Evelyn's skull until her teeth hurt. The boy remained crouched in front of her, calm as a monk, his eyes fixed on hers with that hollow, unwavering stare. She stumbled back, clawing at the gate, but her fingers slipped on wet iron. Please, she begged, voice cracking. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. The ground beneath her split again with a sharp crack. Soil erupted, spilling fragments of coffin wood and bones across the path. Skeletal hands thrust upward, clawing at her ankles. She kicked free, but more arms burst from the dirt, clutching, dragging, their joints creaking with every movement. The boy rose slowly to his feet, the wilted flower still dangling from his hand. His small voice cut through the chanting. No one means to forget, but forgetting is still a crime. The figures behind him surged closer. Their white shrouds fluttered though the air was still. Evelyn saw beneath the veils now, hollow sockets, gaping mouths, faces frozen in eternal grief. The mourners had become the dead they once buried, trapped in ritual forever. Her legs gave way. She fell to her knees, the soil damp and cold against her palms. The skeletal hands tightened around her wrists, pulling her down. Her scream tore through the chanting, but it did not stop them. The boy stepped closer, lifting the flower. Its blackened petals dropped one by one. Teacher, he whispered, you carry our names now. You belong to us. The air collapsed around her. Suddenly she was no longer in the park. She stood in the cemetery as it had been decades ago. Gravestones stretched across the hillside, incense smoke curling toward a pale sky. Families knelt, praying softly. She felt peace for an instant, until the scene shifted. Bulldozers roared, men shouted, stones toppled, smashing against each other. Coffins cracked open, bones spilling. The cries of mourners were drowned by the grinding of machines. Evelyn staggered, helpless, as earth was shoveled over the dead, layer upon layer, until nothing remained but an open wound. And then the grass grew. The playground appeared. Children's laughter replaced the wails. The park was born atop desecration. Evelyn's chest heaved. She tried to tear herself from the vision, but invisible hands held her fast. The boy appeared again, standing on the ruins. His eyes burned black. Do you understand now? He asked. Yes, she choked. I understand, but I can't fix what was done. He tilted his head. Then you will join us. The vision shattered. She was back in the park. The shrouded figures towered above her, chanting louder, louder, until her body shook with the force. The skeletal hands yanked her down into the soil. Dirt filled her mouth, her nose. She clawed upward, but the ground swallowed her wrists. Her arms, pulling her under. She kicked wildly, screaming, until suddenly, silence. The hands loosened, the figures stopped chanting. For a breathless moment, the park froze. Evelyn coughed violently, dragging herself onto the cracked path. Her body trembled, caked with dirt. She looked up, and the boy stood alone now. The others had vanished into mist. His voice was soft, almost sad. "Leave, if you can, but remember us. If you forget, we will come back for you." The gate behind her screeched open. Without thinking, she scrambled to her feet and bolted. She ran through the gap, across the street, into the safety of city lights. She didn't stop until her apartment door slammed shut behind her. Her body shook for hours. She washed her hands again and again, but the smell of soil clung to her skin, the cold of skeletal fingers still pressing her bones. That night, she lay awake, every muscle taut. From her window, she could see the park. By day it looked ordinary again, benches, swings, willows. But as darkness deepened, the mist rose once more. The trees swayed without wind, and faintly, carried on the air, came the sound of chanting. Evelyn pressed her hands to her ears. It didn't matter. The voices were inside her now. Evelyn did not return to the park. Days passed, then weeks, and she avoided even walking near its gates. She changed her route to work, ignoring the extra 20 minutes it added. Her students teased her about looking pale. Her colleagues noticed the dark circles under her eyes. But she said nothing. At night, though, she could not escape. The first time it happened, she was marking papers at her desk. Her eyes blurred with fatigue, and when she looked up, she saw it clearly. Soil scattered across the floor near her shoes. She blinked, and it was gone, but the smell remained, damp earth, cloying incense, the faint rot of flowers left too long at a grave. Sometimes she awoke at 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps pacing her hallway. Slow, deliberate, when she called out, silence answered. Other nights, she heard chanting again, muffled, as if it seeped through the walls. And always, when she dared to glance from her window, the park was watching. The mist rose, the willows shifted, and shadows moved among the benches. Then came the names. She saw them carved not just on stone, but on her desk at school, on the wood of her doorframe, scratched faintly on her bathroom mirror. Always the same pattern, her own name, followed by a blank space. One night, she dreamed she returned to the bench. This time, the blank had been filled. The date matched the day she woke. She bolted upright, heart racing, sweat chilling her skin. The mirror across the room fogged over. Though the air was still, slowly, letters formed across it. "Remember us." Evelyn pressed her hands to her mouth to keep from screaming. The next morning, she closed her curtains, locked her door, and whispered a prayer she barely remembered. But she knew prayers would not save her. The park had chosen her, and memory was its demand. And if she ever tried to forget, she knew the dead would come to collect. Cities are built on layers of memory. Streets are paved over villages. Towers rise where homes once stood. And sometimes, parks bloom where graves once rested. Officials speak of progress, of renewal, of giving life back to the land. But the dead are not so easily erased. The old cemetery was not just soil and stone, it was a record of lives. Names, families, prayers, threads of identity woven into the earth. When bulldozers tore those stones away, they did not destroy the memory. They scattered it, left it restless, and memory without rest becomes haunting. What Evelyn learned was not only terror, it was truth. Forgetting is a violence of its own. When a city forgets its dead, when the living walk over their graves without acknowledgement, the silence festers, it grows teeth, it demands to be heard. The park remains a pleasant place by daylight. Children laugh, families picnic, and joggers trust the ground beneath their shoes. But every step echoes on a hidden layer. Every flowerbed roots into soil that once cradled bones. And when night falls, the balance tips, the living walk lightly, but the dead still breathe beneath. Perhaps the message is simple. Memory is the only burial that lasts. And when memory fails, the earth itself will remind us, through whispers, through shadows, through the sigh of a cemetery disguised as a park.